Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 363 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. On the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV Coach's Corner today, I spoke with Coach Boyle about a Twitter post that he had about posting videos with bad technique. Gonna ask him all about that. Also about curating information with top experts who are providing really contradictory information, and who can we believe, and how do we curate that information that there is so prevalent out there. For the AG1 by Athletic Greens, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. I have on Matt Guffey. Matt owns and operates Victory High Performance, a strength conditioning facility for jiu-jitsu athletes in San Jose, California. We're going to talk about strength training for BJJ, how it's outdated and in need of a major facelift. Talk about his assessment process, what his program looks like, some of the data he's using for managing load intensity. Thoughts on timing of practice and strength and conditioning, kind of something we've been talking about here with everybody lately, and the case against cutting weight in BJJ. That and much more coming up in a little bit. For the Naamly Maximizing the Member Experience with Sumit Seth, he is the founder of Naamly. He's going to talk about crisis communication, and it's really relevant based on something that came up in the industry lately. Good stuff coming up from Sumi, as always, in a little bit. Guys, the huge summer sale at Perform Better is here. Best prices of the year on so many items. Also, don't forget the last summit is in Providence on August 25th to the 27th. If you're having a little financial trouble, if you just want to go for one day, if you want your whole team to go, give them a call. Their motto is that they don't want to turn anyone away. They want to get people as educated as possible. Don't let the cost hold you back. They'll work something out with you. Check it all out at PerformBetter.com. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. You can try StrengthCoach.com out 7 days for free. Totally new format, user-friendly, same great forum. As always, actually, I have a question today from the forum. Go to StrengthCoach.com for your free 7-day trial. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ian. How are you?
All right. Just been running around, so I actually was trying to catch up. And today, sometimes you have like a really slow, let's say, information week. So it was slow this week on Twitter for you, I feel like, anyway. But you had one that you posted, I think, yesterday. I can't get over how many people, coaches, trainers, and setters, post videos of bad squats as if there's some sort of accomplishment. It's like the caption should read, "Too heavy, questionable technique, my back survived." Just one thing, Mike, I do want to ask you. I mean, first of all, if someone posted a perfect back squat, wouldn't you still say they shouldn't be doing that? And then also, sometimes you do post cleans and pull-ups with less than stellar form, and you always preface it, "Hey, I know the form isn't great here, but we're improving," or "this is what we're working on," or just talk to me like why it's different, when you're posting some of those.
My thing is just that if you post it and it's not good, post that it's not good. You know what I mean? Like I watch it and I look and think like, "Ooh, that was a little cringy." And then someone will have this great caption about, "Oh yeah," and I'm just like, sometimes I wonder if they don't know. It bugs me a little bit because I look and think like those ones, and it's almost always somebody, they struggle a little through the sticking point. They get a little bit out of position and then they get it. And I felt like the position should be struggled a little bit through the sticking point, flexed my spine a little bit, but all good. But instead, it's sort of some celebratory title. And I happen to see two of them. I always get up in the morning and I do exactly what you're not supposed to do, which is check my email and then look at Twitter and Instagram, because I know all the productivity experts say don't do that. I do, just in case anybody wants to know, because sometimes it will just stimulate my brain and I'll realize that, wow, this is just something that drives me nuts. And it absolutely drives me nuts. And then I post about it. But again, I don't like back squats, but I don't post like, oh, no one should back squat. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, you're going to hurt yourself. I just kind of look at it and go, do they not like, do they think that was good, or do they just not know? I don't know. I get a little, it's that like that kind of head scratch moment where you
Yeah.
go,
No, I get it. Like I said, you always do preface it like, hey, don't talk to me about the form right here. They're 15. We're working on this. I know that they didn't get this, or I know the pull up looks a little bit,
yesterday
more.
was one of those days. It was funny. We had a coach come in and visit from Italy, and it was that day. It was like week 3 of our heaviest phase, and guys are trying, heavy triples in the chin up. And he kind of looks at me and said, "But, is that okay?" And I'm like, "No, no, it's not." He said, "Am I upset? Am I going to tell them, got to do it again?" Or yeah, I'm like, "No, I understand that week 3 lifts in a 3-week cycle, that day may not look that good. The day where you say, okay, we're going to strain to do something that we haven't done before, probably, yeah, I mean, again, like I said to him, I mean, it's not CrossFit. You don't look at it and want to cover your eyes and go, oh my God, something horrible is going to happen. But at the same time, you look and think, it's like he was looking, he didn't get his chin above the bar in that chin up, but he didn't quite extend his arms. I'm like, yeah, I know. He was like, do you care? I'm like, no, not at all. I just,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I said to him is that you lift weights to get strong. I get it that you got to try sometimes when that happens, and that in the trying, there will be some less than perfect reps. I just, as you said, I try to acknowledge, okay, I understand that wasn't perfect. And I say it to people all the time. I think one of the biggest, I don't know, uh, realizations, people come to MBSC and they expect they're going to come to like this, I don't know, um, display case of strength and conditioning where I'm just going to watch person after person do everything perfect. And then they get there and they go, oh, it's not like that at all. Like that person's knee caved in a little bit, and that person's not going all the way down. And that it's like, yeah, that's real life. That's what training 300 or 400 people a day looks like. It doesn't look like, and I guess that's my point. It doesn't look like somebody's Instagram feed. Sometimes you look and think, okay, all they do is show perfect reps, which is great if you're trying to tell somebody this is what a perfect rep looks like. My thing is the reverse of that, is that if you are doing strength training, you're trying to get stronger, there are going to be some struggle reps. There are going to be some grind reps. And those ones, they're not going to look good. And then you know what probably happens? They probably leave their plates out after they're done.
Those bastards. But you're right though. It's kind of funny how when you look at it, I think even one-on-one, where it's still, never mind 300 people, even one-on-one, you're going to see that. It's just
Right.
hard. People are just, you get certain people that just don't have those movements, and it takes time. Do you find yourself, Mike, using the phone a little bit, the camera on the phone at all? I find myself doing that a lot more these days, just to be like, I got to really show this person your feet. I wanted your foot pressure on the inside of the foot on this one. I wanted this. Have you found yourself using that a little bit
Not as
more?
much. I only use the phone generally when we want to document a lift. When somebody says, hey, let's, this should be good. Let's film this. Not as much as a teaching tool, because I do think sometimes the teaching is in the repetition. It's okay, next set, let's do this. We had some kids in today. We've got some guys in high school football kids. It's week 9 and they still can't clean. And it a little bit frustrating in terms of, wow, we haven't done a really good job. Now they're getting stronger, but again, and it's that balance, too many struggle reps, too much pushing themselves and not enough designation. That's why we always think sort of, for us, our day 1 clean day should be our lighter day, the way it should be. And let's work on our technique that day because we're going to bench press heavy afterwards. Our day 3 workout should be our heavy clean day. And then I watched this high school group and I thought, they basically just have heavy and heavier.
Yeah.
and and it's obvious, but this is also, again, the reality of high school kids is that They don't always listen. They don't always put the right weight on the bar. We've talked about this before. There's just way more to coaching in general than most people who don't coach will understand. I can almost look at some people and think, and it tends to be people who do one-on-one. We had Thomas from Poland who probably listens to the podcast. Thomas was another one. He came in the first day and all he kept asking me was pointing at stuff like, oh, what about that? And what about that? And I'm like, Thomas, you're going to see what about that every day that you're here. You're going to look and think that wasn't perfect. And no one corrected them and no one went over and said, your arm was, you lacked 2 degrees of elbow extension on that chin up, or it's like, that's not really how it works in the real world. And maybe it does in some people's coaching environment, but I would say that if you're doing that, you're probably not building a business. Truthfully, you're not getting people to come back, because if you just nitpick people to death and everything they do isn't right and everything isn't good enough, I don't think you're going to build a really good business. I don't think people are going to continue to come back unless you want a business that is filled with people like that, which I don't.
I'll tell you though, one thing, and you're right. I mean, I've had, at 5 Iron, I had clients that were with me for 10, 12, 13 years. And when you don't want to keep repeating bad stuff, I try to always repeat the good stuff. Like, oh, Mike, great. Nice flat back. Love that butt going back on the deadlift, for example, right? I try to keep it positive because there are so many people that, even if you have them for years, and that's what I even wrote that article, if you remember, I was like, don't look in my window until you talk to me first. And it had to do with the saying, right? Was like, look, you don't know what that person, how they slept or what their program is, or if they're a check the box person who's just happy to be there and you're getting some movement in, great. So I just, I think there is an element of, you gotta find that balance, because some people just are never going to be good movers. So
yeah. And perfect example of that, Steve Vashon on the forum, will ask these unbelievably detailed questions. And sometimes I think, I can't believe he's paying this much attention to the book or to the program, and sometimes my answer will be, oh, we don't even do that anymore. It's like, but it's in the book, or it was in complete youth training. And I'm like, yeah, complete youth training. Mark was 12, at 13
yeah.
years old now. But you realize that everybody's kind of dealing with their own snapshot in time or what they read in the book, and they're not, I guess, humanizing it. They're not looking at it and saying, wait a second, how is this working? Because again, you're right. Like a book is theoretical. It's purely theoretical, right? Here's theoretically what I thought the day that I wrote this chapter. It's very possible that the next day after that chapter, I read something else and I didn't believe that anymore.
Yeah.
And if I'd already clicked send and it was gone to Laree Draper and she was editing it, I'm not going to be like, oh my God, I had another thought about that. And so you never, ever, unless you're with somebody every day, you don't know what that person's thinking. You don't know why they're programming what they're programming. And then if you get someone in a situation like us who sees a lot and does a lot, there's a lot going on in a day, you can have a lot of things changing relatively consistently over a period of time where you think, wow, this stuff is morphing as we go along. I envisioned it would be this way when we started, even this phase. Hey, we did this phase. And sometimes I'll look at stuff and think, somebody will say, oh, like today, I said, go do a vertical jump in between these sets of cleans. It's a complex phase. One of the kids like, it's squat jumps today, not vertical jump. I was like, you're right. Do 5 squat jumps. Fine. But the reality was, if they'd gone and done vertical jumps in the jump mat, I would have been like, fine, do vertical jumps in the jump mat. I think we can get so caught up and think the minutia doesn't really matter. The minutia is just, hey, I put an organizational template on a piece of paper and we called it a program. But the reality was, if somebody said, oh my God, he did incline instead of close grip on that second day, I'd be like, who cares?
Yeah.
We did an alternative pressing other than the bench press. I don't really care what it is. Hopefully he stayed within the rep range that we wanted for that day.
Yeah.
It's way less exact in every way than everybody wants it to be.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good segue into the next. Paul Wilkinson had talked about, there are debates by parties far more experienced and decorated than me, who can be polar opposites in their respective stances on a given subject, quoting theories, research studies, surveys, etc., all purporting to support their argument. And it seems like both of them are right. It's like, for example, I'm listening, I told you, to Peter Attia's book, which is phenomenal, except for one thing that I didn't like that he did. But then you'll hear somebody else talk about something and you'd be like, well, I don't know. Do I believe they're both super reputable? And I think we're getting a lot of good, Lane Norton, the guys like the Huberman, Dr. Andy Galpin. I think, and we're getting good information, but it does contradict. And you had said what you pretty much just said right now. They think the key is to simply give the best advice you can based on what you believe today. Can you just talk about how you, in terms of looking at some of these things, because we're getting to it. I think we've gotten to a great level. I think listening to stuff like Peter Attia and Matthew Walker on sleep and all of these guys, David Sinclair on longevity, and Huberman Lab, etc. There's a lot of science-backed stuff. How are you kind of curating some of that material?
Well, I think in the simplest way possible. Everybody says you should try to eat better. Everybody says you should sleep. Look at, I think we always go back and look, what are the similarities versus the differences? I think we get really caught up in let's argue about the differences as opposed to looking. So I made my shake today. I thought about this exact way. As I'm making my shake, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, collagen protein, put a scoop in. Some people say it's good. Some people say it's all beaks and toenails and
yes,
shit. Don't eat it.
Yeah.
But other people are saying it's really, really good for your connective tissue. Throw some in. Throw some regular protein powder in. Throw some fiber in because that's supposed to be good for you. Throw some greens powder in because that's supposed to be good for you. Put some ice cubes in. Put a little peanut butter in because you want to get some fat in there and I want it to taste better. And it's like, I think we're worried about perfection when we go back to like the 80-20. Like if we can do the 80 really well, then we're going to be okay. And we can keep the 20 to argue about and realize that it probably doesn't matter. So it's almost the reverse. We always say, like in the program, 80% of it's the same, right? And 20% of it's different.
Yeah.
And I think in the nutrition world, 80% of it's the same and 20% of it is stuff that we could argue about and say, oh, if I drink filtered water that didn't come from a mountain spring, I might as well have drank freaking, monkey urine or something. You know what I mean? Like people make it's like, no. I mean, I'm sure that's water and I'm sure it goes into your system and maybe it has less minerals. It's not the end of the world. I tend to not buy it. I won't buy Dasani water. I won't buy the filtered water. But if someone was drinking it in front of me, I also wouldn't have a heart attack. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're drinking that shit. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's where everybody gets so caught up in the differences instead of saying, okay, if I look at my clients, they say, I want to improve my diet. And that's why I said the precision nutrition thing. One thing I'm going to look at is, okay, what aren't you doing? Because it was the perfect example. There was the other forum thread where the guy was talking about helping advice for a friend. And he said, my friend, he drinks, 2 or 3 Gatorades a day and then he buys soda and he does this. And I told him, forget about this guy. You're not gonna be able to help him anyway. But the point was with that guy, if you just say, I just need you to drink more water, that might be a positive step for that guy. Whereas if you said, you can only have organic green tea and you can only have Fiji water. And other than that, if you don't do it, you're not doing it right. That guy's immediately going to get discouraged and be like, I hate green tea. It tastes like shit. I like coffee better. And the Fiji water is 3 times more at Stop and Shop than than the Poland Spring. And but I've had people like that. I have guys in my business, coaches, trainers who say, oh, everything has to be organic. We get organic, nothing but grass-fed meat, pastured eggs, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, if you get you guys to eat meat and you get you guys to eat eggs, you're probably in the right direction. So I think we spend a lot of time majoring in the minors, and that can be training, that can be nutrition. And we take way too strong a stance on too many things that probably don't matter. And again, we get back to, well, what matters? Someone said, the best program, right? 3 times 52, 3 times a week, 52 weeks a year. If you can get somebody to show up and lift 3 times a week, 52 weeks a year, you're going to make progress. If you can get somebody to clean up their eating, reduce their junk food, reduce sugary beverages, sugary cereals, that kind of thing, they're probably going to lose weight. It's not, I mean, we love to nitpick. I think it's the nature of the beast with us.
Yeah, it's interesting. Along the same lines, listening to Michael Easter wrote The Comfort Crisis, and I'm part of his newsletter, and he was talking about the electrolyte stuff. And he's talking about the one that's on every biohacker's website, and it's all over the place. And we know the guy who pretty much started it, and it doesn't have sugar in it. But it turns out that actually, first of all, we probably do not need any of these electrolytes for 90% of the population, because unless you're sweating profusely and you're doing an event 2 to 3 hours, you probably don't need an electrolyte supplement, because we get enough from our food. A lot of them have way too much sodium. Sodium can create high blood pressure. That is the number one killer, right? So the same thing going along the lines with some of those designer waters. The lure to that is the electrolytes in them as well. And then it turns out we probably really, Mike Roussel was part of this conversation, and the nutritionist Kashi, but kind of another one. This is in our favor.
I use an electrolyte supplement now. And what I found is I drink way more water because it makes the water taste better.
Yes.
And I like that. And we do sweat a lot, particularly because, when I do, like, if we ride the bike or do whatever, I mean, I'll be soaked and I'll lose a couple. But I've heard people say it's not even worth drinking water if you don't add electrolytes to it. That's the flip, you know what I mean? And so you look at that and think, well, I don't know if that's true. Should I never drink water if it doesn't have electrolytes? I mean, and I think, so I guess the important point would be the avoidance of the extremes. And I go back, it's funny, the PRI founder's name is
Ruska, Ron Ruska.
Yeah, Ruska. The quote, I use his quote all the time. We want you to add this to your existing program, which we know already works for you. And I love that idea. So whatever it is that you're learning, add this to your existing program that we know already works for you, and think, okay, is there a little bit of something I can do to enhance what we're doing versus throw out everything that we're doing? And again, it goes back to, and people accuse me of it all the time, I'm an absolutist when it comes to training. Don't do this, don't do that. This is a bad exercise. I'm not as much that when it comes to nutrition. So maybe I'm the pot calling the kettle black in some ways, but I do think from a nutrition standpoint, and probably from a training standpoint too, I think you can lose people when you travel too far to an extreme. You're going to limit who your audience is, and you have to be aware of that. If you want to develop a really broad audience, then you have to have a broader set of thoughts. If you're going to have a really narrow set of thoughts, it's probably going to lead you to a really narrow audience.
Absolutely. All right, good stuff, Coach. We will leave you on that note. Thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
Welcome to Naamly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment. My name is Sumit Seth, and I'm the co-founder of Naamly. Today, we're diving into a topic that every successful fitness professional, entrepreneur, leader, GM, everybody needs to master. And that is how to manage your members and your team when something goes wrong. We all know that in the world of fitness, or life in general, unexpected challenges can arise. Equipment malfunctions, scheduling mishaps, or even just an off day for your team. But fear not, because today I'll be sharing some essential strategies and tactics that will help you maintain a seamless member experience even in the face of adversity. It really comes down to communication. When something goes wrong, whether it's a class cancellation or an unforeseen maintenance issue, the worst thing you can do is to keep your members in the dark. Transparency builds trust. So make sure you're proactive in letting your members know about any disruptions. Send out clear and timely notifications through your preferred communication channels, email, social media, text, or your gym app. But remember, it's just not about informing your members. It's also about empathizing with them, showing them that compassion, acknowledging their inconvenience, understanding what they may be going through. A little empathy can go a long, long way in diffusing frustration and turning a negative experience, well, almost into a bearable one and even into a positive one. Now let's talk about how to manage your team, because that's the other side of the coin. Because you're not only a leader to your members, you're also a leader to your team. When something goes wrong, it's crucial to provide clear guidance and support to your staff. Maintain an open line of communication with your team members and make sure they understand their roles in resolving the issue. Encourage your team to stay positive and adaptable. Remind them that challenges are opportunities for growth, and their ability to handle tough situations like these will contribute to the overall success of them and in your fitness business. By setting a positive example, you'll inspire your team to rise to the occasion and deliver an exceptional service, even when faced with unexpected setbacks. Hell, they'll even look up to you more, and they'll know the true leader that you are. Now that we've covered effective communication and leading your team, let's discuss how to turn a crisis into a chance to shine. Believe it or not, a well-handled crisis can actually enhance the member experience. How? By showcasing your professionalism, adaptability, and commitment to customer delight. When your members see that you're dedicated to resolving issues swiftly and transparently, they'll feel valued and respected and heard. Consider offering special perks or bonuses as a gesture of goodwill. This not only shows appreciation for your members' patience, but can also encourage loyalty and word-of-mouth referrals. So the key takeaway basically is all about communication, keeping a level-headed mind, and just being transparent and showing compassion. Communication is essentially the cornerstone of effective crisis management. I hope you've gained valuable insights into managing your members and team during trying times. Until next time, keep inspiring, keep thriving, and keep elevating the fitness experience. Remember, this is Sumit Seth, co-founder of Naamly. For more info, please check out naamly.com and schedule a free demo to discover how we can help in centralizing your entire client communication in one place and also have your entire team on the same page. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on a free 30 days, no strings attached trial.
All right, guys, now time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, brought to you by AG1 by Athletic Greens. 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. I use it every day. I'm actually drinking it right now. It's 4:30 New York time. I kind of get a little bit of a lull in my day sometimes. I will admit I just took a nap, so I was like, I gotta wake myself up a little bit here. So I'm drinking it right now. But Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs, which come in real handy. With your first purchase, all you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach. All right, today I have on Matt Guffey, and Matt owns and operates Victory High Performance, a strength and conditioning facility for jiu-jitsu athletes in San Jose, California. The funny thing is he's actually comes from the hockey world too. Matt, this has been kind of a little hockey run here. I had a Mike Potenza who was close to you.
Yep.
You worked in the Sharks kind of junior program. Mike was the strength coach for the Sharks. I had Kevin Neild on, who Kevin Neild was the assistant for Mike. After that, I got looking to get Matt Nickel on next month or so. Dennis Dunphy, stick mobility guy, is a hockey fanatic. So I don't know. The stars are aligning for the hockey guys here. Matt also is the reigning business owner of the year for the Results Fitness University Mastermind Group. No small feat. A lot of great people in that group. He's also an author. He wrote Move, Feel, Perform Better. That's an ebook. We'll probably talk to him about that a little bit at the end. So, Matt, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, brother. I've had on over the years a bunch of people talking about whether it's MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or just different martial artists. And kind of, I always find it interesting with this idea about kind of some of the fighting arts and the traditions that they've had, that they've always stuck to. But things are changing. And wanted to get you on once you reached out. I thought it was we had a conversation. Be interesting to kind of see where you are with this stuff and your gym, because your gym is I heard you saying is predominantly jiu-jitsu athletes, 90%. I know you got some hockey players coming in, but so it'll be interesting to see where you're at and, what's important, because, you have to, a lot of your decisions, that's the lens that you're looking through. So let's start out by talking about where kind of strength training was there any, and it kind of maybe being outdated when it came about, and then how maybe, with all of this sports science data that we have access to now, that seems like a sport that would, in the very least, could use some HRV data. And that's where really Joel Jameson stuff really kind of originally came from as well. So let's start out with that. The history kind of strength training for BJJ and where you feel it's been and where might need a major facelift.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think globally speaking, there hasn't been much there. It's not a big budget sport. Like, I have the luxury, like you said earlier, of coming from hockey being that big budget sport where, there are $1 million assets on the ice. And so owners put a lot of, they invest a lot of time and money into keeping those assets on the ice. And having come up through that world, that's given me maybe a different perspective than most people in the jiu-jitsu world are accustomed to. I think jiu-jitsu in general, we'll call it, I think it's a pervasive thought that it has to be backbreakingly hard for it to be effective at all. That goes for both the training on the mats, whether it's the skill work or whatever it is that you do off the mats. Off the mats, there hasn't been any real direction. It's typically people just doing, high intensity interval training. It's not to knock that particular, modality. It might not be the best thing for the person at hand. Right. So I think that's, as far as where it's come from, that kind of describes it as just, it's got to be hard. It's got to be the toughest thing I've done today. I shouldn't be able to walk by the end. And if I can, then I didn't do enough, and it's not going to get me where I want to go. And so, what I've kind of done is come from that big budget sport mentality and come over to jiu-jitsu, because this is something that when I was done playing, I wanted to continue competing, and I enjoy a, physical challenge. And I had some experience with jiu-jitsu previously when I was, growing up, but nothing extensive. And so when I stopped playing and moved out here to San Jose, started coaching for the Junior Sharks, I got into jiu-jitsu. I found they're right down the street. The guy who owns the gym is 12-time world champion, Kyotera. He's a legend. Like he's got, we have techniques named after you. There's something, to be said about that. And he's right down the street, and he coaches still. Like it's not like he just has his name there and he doesn't do anything. Like he's a part of the community. And so I was like, man, I'd be stupid not to go to this place. So I joined, I fell in love with it. I found myself around, world champions at all kinds of different levels. And that was really cool. And so when I made the transition from coaching on the ice to coaching in the gym, it seemed like the right thing to do. I love spending time on the mats. It's what I love doing most. If I'm not at home with my wife or at the gym coaching people, that's where I'm at. So I thought, well, why not take this mentality that I've gained from, all my experience in hockey and bring it to what I would consider a grossly underserved population. right? It's really common. People think, well, injury is just a part of sport. Well, bumps and bruises, yes, but you shouldn't have to ask your partners, are you injured today or are you training? Because that question gets asked all the time. And that really bothered me. And so I thought, this would be a good a time as ever to, to bring something different to jiu-jitsu and help those people stay on the mats longer, do more of what they love.
I will say, one of the reasons, I'll admit that the main reason I will not do that, I'm 56. I am not starting something like that right now because of everybody I speak to who does it gets injured. And it's not, oh, I hurt my elbow, or yeah, my wrist is bothering me. It's more like, yeah, I broke my elbow, I broke my I'm like, no, I don't want to deal with that right now. I mean, I love the workout. Everybody raves about it, but I just don't want to get hurt. And so I got to come out to San Jose and make the commute and see what you're doing.
I think the reason that is twofold. The first is, we talked about it being the general thought that it's got to be backbreakingly hard.
Yeah.
It's from a coaching perspective on the mats, a lot of these guys, they get their black belt. I mean, it's not to say that other belts can't coach, but they get their black belt, they open a gym, but they haven't really studied how to coach, right? They are considered, a master, so to speak, of this art.
Yes.
But there isn't any coaching education, it's just, here's the technique, you're lucky if you have a curriculum to follow. That's not commonplace in jiu-jitsu yet. It's starting to gain ground, but there isn't a lot of coaching education in that space. And so, managing load or managing intensity for members, especially newcomers, is really, really difficult. On top of that, it is, Joe Rogan's mentioned this before. It's human chess with dire physical consequences, meaning if you make a mistake, you're put in a chokehold or you're put in an arm lock or something, you're at end range of motion, your arm doesn't go anymore. And so if you don't know anything, then you run the risk of getting injured because you maybe don't tap in time, maybe you're overtrained, maybe, there's a gross litany of factors that play into all the injuries that happen. And then off the mats, like we said, the strength and conditioning piece isn't there yet, globally speaking, for jiu-jitsu athletes.
So let's talk about what your approach then, because I feel like this is not something, and in the beginning, this is always what happens. Well, let's just get them in the gym and do functional training. And then you start to see people, this is one of those things. And we had Matt Hibbler on last week talking about tactical training and this idea where there hasn't been a long history of really good training. And so it ends up being like this idea, let's do 100 burpees, let's do the Murph to get in shape for this type of stuff. Or it's it's over the top crazy. But also I'm assuming, you can't just do hey, just get some, push, pull, hinge, squat, rotate, carry. It's not that, and then you're going to throw in some things that you think, it looks like the sport. You're in that danger zone of, for a golfer, taking a dumbbell and swinging it like a golf club. So talk to me about where you stand on this, because I know you followed Coach Boyle's type stuff, and you're a member with the Cosgroves, so I know the programming is going to be in that same line. And you're coming from a hockey background; it's not going to be the same. So just talk to us about what are you doing, and then kind of segue that into maybe, or add the data that you're using, and because you talked about that too, is we have opportunity now. It's a sport that could really use something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first, probably important to mention, I've heard Coach Boyle say it several times, your sport's not special. And that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to be a little more specific, like you said. but we don't want to do what you talked about and swing a dumbbell as if it was a golf club, right? That's just not how it works. So this is probably a good opportunity to just start with our assessment process. Because what we want to do is we want to meet people where they're at. I think good training for jiu-jitsu is just good training. And that starts with just knowing where you are, right? Knowing where you start and where you want to be, and then finding that place and going from there. So, when we assess people, when we go through our strategy session, we talk about all their goals, medical, injury history, their training schedule, everything that would possibly go into, building the program, and then after that, we get them into the gym. We go through, movement and strength assessments. And what we start with is that the FRC, it's just a CARS assessment. And all we're looking for is how does each joint move by itself, right? It's independence before interdependence is the saying that is like it's a huge part of that lens, right? The FRC lens. So I want to see, how does each joint move by itself? Does it move without pain? Are there any imbalances from side to side? And we can, through that CARS assessment, oftentimes old injuries come up that they maybe forgot about during the strategy session, which is good. We typically go through and people are like, oh yeah, I forgot. I tore my labrum. I'm like, this is important to know, right? So we can go through and really, get a really deep dive into what, how they're feeling, and we tell them like, this is a daily thing. Like we want to be working at these end ranges because the sport spends so much time at end range. We think it's really, really important to at least have something in there, something in the program that focuses on that, because the name of the game is to break joints. At the end of the day, it's to take my arm all the way, full extension, and then a little bit further and make me have to end the round. And so if you're not paying attention to how things feel, especially at end range, then that could be problematic. That's why we start with that. After the CARS assessment, we go into, just the FMS, because now we want to look at how do these joints function in conjunction with each other in movement patterns that we'll typically see during training sessions and on the mats. You could break down the FMS and look at each one of those movements and say, okay, like this is where this applies on the mats. There's a very clear, line or link between the two. And so we go through the FMS, again, looking for low-hanging fruit, imbalances. I think Coach Cressy's talked about it, though, not using the FMS, not being so rigid in your assessment there and saying, okay, like maybe some of these things are adaptations and not deficits, right? Like he talks about internal rotation, having internal rotation deficit on one arm for baseball athletes. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. It's the body has adapted in a certain way. And so when we see things like that in the FMS, that gives us another reason to ask questions and to find out more and say, okay, like why, maybe, what's going on this side versus this side? Did you get injured? Did you play another sport? Did you, because a lot of these people who start jiu-jitsu are athletes and they've played sports their whole life, and then they come and then they do jiu-jitsu later. Haven't quite seen the youth group start to come up yet. And so most of the people that we have are between the ages of 25 and 45 probably, who started jiu-jitsu as adults. And, eventually we'll get into, the youth who are coming up and starting to pay a little bit more attention to the science and everything. So anyways, we go through the FMS, and then at the end we do a couple of strength assessments. We'll do push-ups, pull-ups. We'll do some grip strength stuff just to see where they're at. And that helps us paint a pretty good picture between the strategy session, where we're talking about all their goals and medical injury history, and then the FRC or the CARS assessment, the FMS, their strength stuff. And now we've got a really, really good data pool to draw from when we make the program. And then as far as the programming goes, like you said, kind of where my head's at. I'm a Coach Boyle follower. I've been through CFSC. we build the program based on all that data and say, okay, like, are there things that are more pressing here or there? If somebody goes through the CARS assessment and we notice closing angle pain on a certain side, say their shoulder, the right shoulder. Okay, well, that's something that we need to focus on before we start giving them, a ton of presses or maybe even rows. Let's figure that out first.
Wait,
Yep.
can you repeat that? I lost you there. Can you say somebody goes through the CARS assessment? That's what you were saying. Can you repeat that part?
Yep. So say somebody goes through the CARS assessment and we identify closing angle pain on, say, their shoulder, right? That's going to tell us that we need to make certain programming decisions that help alleviate that first. Obviously, if they're in pain and they can't get out of it, then we refer out. We're not physical therapists. I get that. But oftentimes we find, somebody might present with pain. And, when I learned how to do CARS, they just told us either to pizza around it or ping pong back and forth. And on several occasions, people are like, I feel pain here. I'm like, all right, let's go the other way. Go the other way. They're like, that's a little bit less. I'm like, all right, let's go back the other way. And we keep going back. And eventually it goes away in that session, which is really cool. You see people's eyes light up and they're like, I never knew that was possible. Like, I've just been like dealing with this forever. And so anyways, we use those assessments to modify our general program, right? We have our, we come in, we do a foam roll, breathe, do our mobility stuff. It may be mobility, it may be pattern practice. It just depends on what they present with. Because if they've got mobility deficits and they're deficits that are detrimental or could be detrimental to their performance on the mats, then we address that first before we address the pattern, right? If they get all the way through CARS, there's no pain, there's no, gross imbalance from one side to the other, then we'll go through the pattern practice and teach them how to move, right? Go through our warm up and then power and strength. And then that's how we structure it. I mean, it's not any different than I think a lot of people, especially Coach Boyle followers would program it. But I think the key is just meeting them where they're at. That's where people miss, right? It's not just a blanket program that, everybody gets exactly the same thing. And we're doing, like you said, 100 burpees and, Murph or whatever it is, we're not trying to like kill them. We want to build them up. And so I don't think it's any different than you would approach a golfer or a hockey player in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. But the thing that I've been, or, that I'll argue with people about the sport specific thing is, it's 80-20. 80% of the stuff we're doing is all the same for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to look at that. It's that 20%. We could argue all day. Coach Boyle might say 10. No, it's only 10%. But I still do think it depends on your sport. But we were talking last episode about this in terms of, look, fascia has really come mainstream. We have Thomas Myers really started the ball rolling. We have guys like Bill Parisi now and Danny Foley with courses. Somebody like Dennis Dunphy from Stick Mobility, Greg Rose using Guy Voyer's Eldoa principles in what they're doing. These things take a little longer, like CARS. Dewey Nielsen, and I should say Dr. Andre Ospina first, but Dewey's my buddy, and so is Andre. But they're Dewey's, he owns a jiu-jitsu place, right? Dre always loved that fighting was his first love. It's the lens that he was looking through too. So in my opinion, I feel like, yes, are we going to look at that same template? But to me, the template needs to be for that mobility piece, the end range of motion, the CARS, the pails and rails stuff, whatever. That needs a little more attention than maybe the other stuff. Would you agree? For example, Coach Boyle always said, okay, we foam roll for 5 minutes. Then we have static stretching for 5. I forget what it is. And then 10 is dynamic warm up. And then we go into power, whatever. But to me, this would be, no, we need 25 minutes of, because I was in a session with Greg Rose talking and doing the stick mobility stuff. Things, each one was 2 to 3 minutes.
Right.
Like that might not be forever, but we have to take a step back, in my opinion, to work on these things and put some things like those buckets in. I know there's not an important bucket more important than the other, but right now I do feel like that mobility, stability bucket would be super important.
100%. Yeah. And I should say that, if we have somebody who presents with a mobility deficit that we need to address, then that goes in, like we foam roll and then jump right into mobility stuff. And that might take 10 minutes, right? We might just work on shoulders for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then if it's something that needs, a lot of work, then we may substitute things in our typical strength blocks toward the end. We may take things out and add more mobility stuff so that it does take a higher, it does have a higher priority than some other things. Now, once, we start to see increases in range of motion and strength at end range, and we start to get the adaptation that we want, then we can pull those out, work a little bit less, move back to your typical, your typical strength block or template that we would normally use for an athlete who doesn't present with a mobility deficit like that.
Yeah.
So I think you're 100% right. That it should take it should take more if they need it.
Yeah. And that's the sport specific piece. And it really is athlete specific, because you're looking like some athletes might come in and they're fine in those ranges of motion. So you're like, cool, well, you're cleared. We can go.
Yeah.
So now let's go over your template then. You're coming from this. So like, I'm sure people would be interested in seeing like, okay, here you go. You got a jiu-jitsu gym and let's talk about what somebody would generally, your template, how you're ideally want to train them, that BJJ athlete.
Yeah. I mean, if we go through our foam roll and breath work, our mobility stuff, after that, get into our dynamic warm up. We use the dynamic warm up to build some more complete athletic profile, right? We try to vary the movements. I mean, it very closely resembles that of the CFSC, right? It's not much different, but we do add our own flavor to it, right? We want people moving in different planes, and we want people moving at different rhythms, and we try to move them backwards and sideways and all kinds of different ways. So we're not just trying to raise body temperature and, we're trying to build athletes, right? We want, good movement is good movement. And if they move well here, then chances are they're going to pick up skills on the mats that they maybe wouldn't have been able to do before, right? If they're able to skip sideways and backwards, and if they're able to karaoke left, right, backwards, forward, all that stuff. So we try to vary that as much as we can so that people, so we're able to build a more complete athletic profile. And then from there, we get into our speed and power stuff. We do sprint a lot of our athletes if they are cleared to do it. We won't sprint them if they're injured. We won't sprint them if they, if they're over a certain age. Of course, that depends, because if they come from, a sprinting background or they've sprinted their whole lives, then who am I to tell them that they can't do that? If they want to do it, then we'll do it. But we are careful about it, right? If they don't sprint, a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes come in with bumps and bruises, then we use the air bike in really short intervals just to get just maximum power as much as we can get in that very, very short space. But plenty of rest in between. It's not a conditioning thing. That's another big misconception, is people get on the bike and they're like, oh, it's conditioning. I'm like, well, it is, but not the conditioning that you're thinking of, right? Like, we're trying to get maximum output in a short amount of time and see how much we can get, because it's low impact, right? Like, these people are always dealing with knees and shoulders and elbows and, all kinds of things that might preclude them from, being eligible to sprint. And then from there, med balls and plyos, again, looks a lot like the CFSC. But as they get further and further into the progressions, they do tend to look a little bit more like the sport. We're not swinging dumbbells or anything, but we may include like overhead throws with a rotation instead of just like a throw at the wall, because there's a lot of rotation in jiu-jitsu, and power is plane specific. And so we want to teach people how to rotate and throw at the same time. That's something they're going to see, or something they're going to do. And then after all of that, then we get into our strength blocks. So typically it's lower core, upper, lower core, upper. And then, if the lower is posterior chain, then the upper is anterior chain. Like, everything that you've probably heard before, it's that's where it doesn't differ a lot. It's really, really similar. And so that's what that looks like. There is a huge single leg bias. That's another thing that's really missing from jiu-jitsu, like strength and conditioning in jiu-jitsu is, I think in the past, people have just looked to bodybuilders and power lifters. And if it's not like high intensity interval training stuff, those are probably the two biggest influences on, if you were to call it strength and conditioning in jiu-jitsu. And so, people kind of live and die by squat, deadlift, bench. And at the end of the day, you've heard Coach Boyle say it, you move one leg at a time, you walk one leg at a time, you run one leg at a time. In jiu-jitsu, you're very rarely, if you're ever standing there with 50% of your weight distributed on either foot. It just doesn't happen that way. If you are, you're going to get taken down. Like it's a no-brainer. So you're constantly shifting. You're constantly on one foot, on one foot more than the other. And so there's a big single leg bias in our programming. And I think that's, if there was something that was probably translated the best from all the things that I just talked about, other than obviously the mobility stuff for those who need it, that would be the biggest thing. After people start doing a lot of single leg stuff, they come back to us a month, 2 months later, and they're like, I'm unsweepable. Like people, I'm able to stay, I'm able to be on my feet and not have to worry about people knocking me over. And so that's been really cool.
Interesting. Are there any, for example, I try like with golfers, and by the way, I'm with you on the short intervals. Like with golfers, I would do 5 seconds a lot of times because I just want to, and I would say, bring it way down. I don't want you moving that 25 seconds. I want you almost to be in slow motion. So 5:25 I would do. And what I wanted them to do is create this power from nothing, because that to me was what was happening in the golf swing. And I generally had some older guys that were mostly coming into the gym for golf. And I just felt like it was a really safe, like you did. But to stay on that theme, I talk to a lot of my golfers about standing up. I do a lot of cable stuff. I'm like, listen, I want you to be strong in the address position, in a split stance position, with your right foot forward, with your left foot forward. I want to be able to not rotate. I want to be able to rotate in all of these positions. I want to be able to row. Will we get to some dumbbell work? Absolutely, some pressing and whatever. But in general, I start out with things standing up because I do believe they're standing up the whole sport. So with you, are you working on anything like let's say, and this is the danger, I can make it up, is like take a med ball on my back, try to get up and throw it to the wall, because there's going to be these positions where you're on the ground, you're getting up, you have to exhibit that power. Just what's different from that respect? And you did talk about, are you using sandbags to kind of over the shoulder to throw things around? I mean, again, that might just be in practice.
Yeah. So as far as where we start, we typically start people in a tall kneeling position. That's a really common place to be in jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
And it's most points of contact on the ground. So it's the easiest to teach, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We do move them up to standing because that's the goal. We try to move, least complex to most complex, or most points of contact to least points of contact. We do use cables a lot. That's something that's really common in our programming. I especially like having like a high cable, like an X pull down, or like a low cable row. Those are all really helpful, because when you're standing in jiu-jitsu, you are probably pulling at that same angle, right, that you would be if you've got like a low cable row, because it's somebody who's probably on their back or on their hips beneath you, and so that's kind of mimics that same angle. We do use sandbags. We typically will use sandbags so like for our posterior chain stuff, like our bilateral posterior chain stuff, we'll start with the deadlift pattern. And then, once we kind of go through either whether it's the kettlebell deadlift, the trap bar deadlift, we might do a B stance deadlift, because that's something that's a position that we're always in, right? Having 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, a little more weight on 1 foot, but having to lift a lot of weight doing it. And then once people start to plateau there, then we'll move them into more like a more power bias program, where sandbags are really, really important, because not a lot of people can, like, we hang clean a lot of our hockey players. We don't hang clean a lot of our jiu-jitsu athletes. Their wrists are banged up, their shoulders aren't very good. And so the sandbags play a really pivotal role in building that power, without having to tax all those other joints.
Yeah, I love the sandbag personally because of my, again, I'm a little older, and then I have no problem using the sandbag for a clean. It's awesome.
Huge. It's huge. So implementing those is really, really, really important for us, just given the population that we have.
Yeah.
And that dynamic resistance, it's never the same, from side to side. And so, each rep is just a little bit different, and that's jujitsu, right? Because I'm not moving, a bar that's evenly distributed from one side to the other. I'm moving a person, and that person is going to be shaped a little different from one round to the next. And, it's just never the same. And so I think the sandbag is huge for us.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's talk about the data. We kind of did touch on it a little bit. There's an opportunity there really this is a sport when guys start to get or gals start to get really serious, they're practicing a lot, the sport, right? Especially if they're involved in MMA, where they're doing other martial arts. So you have to, look at managing that load. So how are you doing it? And where is the other opportunities there, or how maybe for data?
Yep. So, I mean, we use Train Heroic to track everything that we do. That's probably the simplest answer is, we track every lift, every pound, for every rep, for every set. And that's something that when most people come in and we show them that, and they're like, I never thought that I could ever do that. Like, I'm so used to just writing everything down, and then I lose the paper and I have no idea what I did from week to week.
Yeah.
And they're so surprised. And I'm like, I'm surprised that they're surprised. I'm like, we're in Silicon Valley. This seems like it'd be pretty commonplace, but it's not. So we use Train Heroic to track all of our lifts. That's probably the biggest data pool that we have, is just, all of that gets compiled. And
do you make them, because I love Train Heroic, and do you make them like, please answer those questions beforehand, the 5 questions about how you're feeling and soreness. And then there's the after the workout, which is kind of cool too. It always tells you, like, you lifted 15,000 pounds this workout.
It's
cool.
wild. So we are, I guess if I had to, I'll backtrack a little bit. How we manage load starts when they walk in the door, right? Because I can tell right away if somebody's really dragging, and I'm like, all right, this is going to be we're going to have to back off a little bit today. I'm looking at verbal and nonverbal cues. I'm, how they're feeling, I'll talk to them as soon as they get in. Hey, how's everything going? And you'll hear it in their voice. They're either like, I'm ready to go, let's do it. Or today was a long day, like long training, long work. Like I'm going to be slow. I'm like, all right, like, we'll meet you there. And then we go over, and then we've got the hard data, the quantitative data, in those 5 questions at the beginning. And we can take a look, once they fill that in and they get off and they're foam rolling on the side, we can look back and say, okay, like typically they're at like a 3.5. Today it's like a 2. That fits. They walked in, they said today was a long day. I get it. All right. And so those would be like the first pieces, when we see that or hear that, then we know whether today's a day we're going to push, or today's a day where we're going to back off a little bit, or maybe we're right in the middle. Maybe today we just, steady Eddie. And then, like I said, we track all that data. And then we're looking, we typically run, like in a 4-week program, our deload week is at the beginning. And so we use that deload week to teach new movements. We don't want to crush them. We want to say, like, say one program, they've got trap bar, deadlift, front plank, and push-ups. And then as they get through, we go all the way to the next program, and maybe it's B stance trap bar, body stop plank, and weighted push-ups or some other push-up variation. So this is a couple things. The first is it allows us to coach really quickly from phase to phase. So when we move from one thing to the next, we don't have to re-explain. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, from week to week. Yeah. Right. Now, within each of those, the first week, that deload week, might be 2 sets of 10 reps, right, for the trap bar. We'll just use the trap bar as our example here. Okay. Second week, we go more sets, lower reps, a little bit higher intensity, but not too much higher because it's still more volume overall, right? And in that first week, we're looking for 7s out of 10s, more or less. And the second week, we're looking for 8 out of 10s. That third week, we'll go down to 6 reps. So now our intensity goes up even more, right? But the volume goes down. And then that last week, we call it send it week. And it's just 3 sets of 4. And we're going for 10 out of 10 RPE. And it's your chance to go. You go as hard as you can. You should leave nothing left on the table. And then, we move into that next phase. That first week is our deload week. We go back to 2 sets of 10. Teaching moments. Let's go over our last, 4 weeks. What did you do well? What did you need work on? How do we change this? How do we make it better? And we go back down to 7 out of 10. So that's how we address the, that thought process in jiu-jitsu, the old school mentality where it's got to be hard. It's got to, it has to break my back. Otherwise it didn't work. 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s 1 week, and then go back to 7 and just keep bumping it up like that. And so you look at people's like trap bar numbers and you see this like nice little graph that kind of goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. But if you look over the course of a year, it's massive. It's a huge gain. And they do that only lifting once or twice a week, right? You mentioned at the beginning of this, you said people get to the higher levels, they want to train a lot, and they train 5, 6, 7 days a week. And that means we don't have a lot of time, right? There's nothing, and I wouldn't want to convince a jiu-jitsu athlete to take time off the mats to come into my gym for 3 or 4 days a week. It doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, the skill work is what's going to get you better. Our job is to build them up on the backside, right? So that they can handle 5, 6, 7 days a week on the mats. And so seeing those graphs like that and seeing the progression over the long term is really, really cool. I think people, when they see it in that form, they have no choice but to buy in, right? Like, it obviously works. Like, look at where I was, look where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting sport because there's really no off season.
None.
Right. And I wanted to kind of, we had Coach Boyle a couple weeks ago. We were talking about an article by Matt Clark that was on Simply Faster, and it was called "When Should Track Athletes Lift?" And Coach Boyle kind of turned it into a forum post about when should athletes lift. And at the end, essentially, is it before practice when the work is performed without fatigue from sports practice, impeding the quality of the lift, or is it after practice? Excuse me. So athletes can train their sport practice without fatigue from the weight room interfering with their practice quality. So talk to us about where you stand on this, how, you might not have any control over it, but talk to us about your thoughts on this.
I think the most diplomatic answer is you should lift when you have the time. And that like you said, you might not have control over it. And a lot of our people don't because they've got full-time jobs. We have some who are full-time jiu-jitsu athletes. If that's the case, I prefer to have them lift before. I think the training is so intense on the mats that if they lift after, they see slower or fewer gains. Whereas if they lift before, it's, how do I say this? Somebody trains 5 days a week, and we'll say the first person lifts twice a week before 2 times on the mats. So that might be 2 times where their skill development suffers a little bit, but overall it's okay. And then you have the second person who trains 5 days a week on the mats and lifts both times after training. That person, they're not going to see the same gains, right? And that's why I prefer to do it before. I think it's your net positive at the end if you lift before versus after. That being said, it's hard for people to lift before because a lot of people I train myself. When I'm on the mats, I'm on at 6:30 in the morning. So I always lift after. But if I had it my way, I would lift before.
Yeah, I was telling you earlier, I know a guy who, he's a maniac in the gym. Everything is like kind of CrossFit-y type, super high, intense, level 10, 7 days a week, believe it or not. And he got into jiu-jitsu, I don't know, I think he got 6-8 months ago. And it's always after because he goes to the gym at 4 a.m. And I did pose the question, like, why, I think you should try once in a while to do it the opposite, to kind of be fresh for jiu-jitsu. This is before all this stuff came out, but I just, obviously there's always going to be an interplay because like you said, it's based on the schedule of that person when they're going to getting on the mats. Right. So,
yeah.
Let's just talk about your thoughts on, this is another thing where there's a lot of old school thought process, and that is cutting weight. Can you just talk about, because obviously the strength coach, this is important for the strength coach, and I'm not sure if you're helping them with their nutrition. I'm assuming on some level you are. What is your stance about cutting weight and how you're doing it safely and some things the way it's been done in the past?
I'll start by saying I don't think anybody should cut weight.
Okay.
I think it is grossly overrated. It is something that, while we talk about kind of the old school thought process is, well, everybody cuts weight, so I need to cut weight.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the number of I can't even begin to explain the sheer lunacy that I have seen at competitions. I've seen people standing over a trash can, spitting. I've seen like all of the, the classic, wearing a trash bag over and it's just like, you realize that you're dehydrated, right? I mean, from the MMA perspective, these guys go through these massive cuts, they weigh in, and then they've got 24 hours to refuel. There are problems with that, but they have 24 hours at least.
Yeah.
In jiu-jitsu, you weigh in and you compete minutes later.
Oh, wow.
And so if you're cutting weight, some of these people cut 10, 15, some 20 pounds, and you're going in, you weigh in, you have absolutely zero time to refuel. You're going in dehydrated. You're going in likely with some kind of brain fog. You're not fueled. And it just goes against everything that I would imagine. It goes against all common sense, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like how far would your car drive if you didn't put gas in it? Not very far. So if you're going in and you're not fed and you haven't drank any water, then what are you doing? And listen, I say that as somebody who did it, right? Like when I first started jiu-jitsu, I, competed a lot and I still compete a lot, but, at the time I was walking around at probably 175 and I cut down to 160 because that was what was expected, right? That's what everybody did. And they were like, oh, you walk around 175 and you should compete at lightweight. I'm like, okay. And I did that. And I can't tell you how miserable I was. I go into these competitions and some of them I won, some of them I lost, but in every single one, I was like, I just can't wait for this to be over. I don't care what happens. Like, just want to eat, just want to drink. I can remember one in particular where I was competing in the gi and in no gi also in the same day. And in the gi, the limit was, I think, 162 and a half. And no gi, it was 158. And so no-gi was second, which means I had to weigh in at below 158 for the gi because I couldn't, because I had to be 4 pounds less, 4.5 pounds less in the evening. And so I'm like massively dehydrated. I have no fuel, none whatsoever. I couldn't even tell you what happened in the tournament. I just I don't care. I just want it to be over so that I can eat. And I go through the no-gi and I'm just, again, miserable. And I maybe won one match. And then the second one, I just had nothing left. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is not fun. I don't love it. I'm not enjoying myself right now. I just want to go eat. And, so I've lived it. I've done what a lot of these people have done. I felt it. It's not I don't think it's a viable long-term solution. I also don't think the perceived benefits are what people think they are.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, well, I'm going to go down and I want to be the heaviest one in the weight class. But if you're the heaviest one and you're the least fueled, what good does that do? Like, I would rather be at the bottom of my weight class. And now I compete at middle heavy with the upper limit's 195 and I walk around at 188-ish, 190. And so I'm in the middle of mine, right? I'm in the middle of my weight class. But I'd much rather be the strongest and most fueled and most hydrated one.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like that just seems like common sense to me. It doesn't seem like it would.
Yeah. Those guys at 194, 193, they're dehydrated. They're in a fog. You're going to beat those guys.
Right. And so what good does that do? That's not to mention the long list of potential side effects. I mean, you've seen a lot of these guys go into, MMA bouts and they're medically unfit to perform. They get pulled from the card because a doctor says, hey, this is probably not safe. So if doctors are saying it's probably not safe, why would we accept this, across the board? And it's going to take a lot of time. I don't know if I'll ever see it in my lifetime that people just don't cut anymore. But I've made it, one of my side quests, so to speak, to tell people that they just get strong. It's way easier to get strong.
Yeah.
There's nobody's going to argue with, nobody ever got hurt from being too strong. And nobody's going to argue with the benefits of strength training. It is unanimous. It helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the benefits or perceived benefits of weight cutting are debatable at best, and at worst, harmful to the athlete.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. All right, we got 2 minutes. Give us an overview. Who and what? Who it's for? And what's in it? What can we learn from it? Move, Feel, Perform Better ebook.
Yeah. So the ebook is on strongandfit.com, which is a subsidiary of BJJ Fanatics, the preeminent source of jiu-jitsu content on the planet. And so it's meant to be a simple solution that anybody can carry out. Whether they're a jiu-jitsu athlete or they're just somebody who wants to play with their kids. It follows very closely our general template, everything that we talked about, throughout the podcast. There's some mobility stuff, there's some power stuff, there's some speed stuff, there's some strength stuff. Again, that single leg bias is ever present, but super simple to follow. There are videos for everything, so that there's a demo. You've got something there, so you're not out there by yourself trying to figure it out or having to YouTube names of things. It's very, very simply laid out. There are instructions at each phase. There are 3 phases. Each one is 4 weeks. And you could essentially repeat that, for several iterations and still see really, really good gains.
Very cool, Matt. I love all that you're doing at Victory High Performance in San Jose. Again, congratulations on the Business Owner of the Year for the Results Fitness University Mastermind Group. And I know the book is relatively new, and we'll have links for that at StrengthCoachPodcast.com as well. So, Matt, thanks for coming on and sharing your knowledge, some seriously sensible knowledge about training for jiu-jitsu.
Thanks so much.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 363 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Guys, the show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. Don't forget, you can try out the new StrengthCoach.com for 7 days for free. Check out your trial at StrengthCoach.com. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. The huge summer sale is here. Best prices of the year on so many items. The last summit is coming up August 25th to 27th. Check it all out at PerformBetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Matt Guffey for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement and martial arts strength and conditioning. Check out the anniversary interview I did with Coach Boyle, 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. There's a link to access that interview at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. Thanks to Sumit Seth and Naamly, helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to Naamly.com, use the referral code StrengthCoach, and get started on your free 30-day trial. Thanks to AG1 from Athletic Greens. Visit athleticgreens.com/StrengthCoach. Get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. That's going to do it for this episode. My name's Anthony Renna. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.